Hello and good afternoon. I hope you all had a decent lunch. We're really excited to have you here today in this afternoon's session. The power of partnership, how AI, 5G, Edge can drive the next level of connectivity. We're very excited that you're here. Thank you very much for coming. We're going to make this a very interesting session. We've got today Kurtis Lindqvist, CEO from Linx, and Simon Michie, CTO at Pulsant. We'll come to some introductions in a moment, but first, I'd like to say that it's very interesting to have this conversation at this time because connectivity is entering a new era. Its role has never been more essential. New technologies are driving increased demand for both capacity and resiliency. I started out my technology journey in a company called 3Com years ago, and if anybody remembers the birth of Ethernet technology, you'll also remember that that company was very focused on the idea of building connectivity between different platforms and different technologies. In many senses, that's exactly what an internet exchange does today, and 3Com was founded over 40 years ago. But its focus on connectivity is something that Linx still does very much today. And looking ahead to the future, business models for both 5G, that depend on 5G, also AI and other technologies are going to drive increased demands for the kinds of connectivity we do today, but also new ones. And they're going to form new business models and new types of ecosystems around those business models. So solving for the future and building new business models and pioneering new levels of connectivity will depend on the collective power of communities and ecosystems. So Kurtis, it's 10 years for Linx in Scotland. Congratulations. It's almost 30 years since Linx was founded as a pioneering exchange in London, and now Linx is a global interconnection platform. Congratulations on Nairobi, and it's been a busy few months for you, hasn't it? I think. So tell me a little bit. How's that been for the last few months?
So Linx, we provide, well, as you said, platforms in the UK. So we operate in London, Manchester, Scotland, Wales, Isle of Man, in Virginia in the US, in Saudi Arabia, and now Kenya. It has been a very, very busy few months for many reasons. Kenya has obviously taken a bit of focus for us. It's the third non-UK place we go to, so that's quite exciting. And building up this thing from scratch. And Linx is a membership organization, so we're not for profit. We actually, to the topic of today, is that we work together with our members, which are 900 telco operators from 84 countries or over 80 countries worldwide. And by supplying them with their needs for interconnecting or sending traffic between each other, we work a lot with this. I think the topic of today is about Edge and AI and so on. We're going to come to that in a second. But supporting the regional traffic exchange or the growth of exchange, whether we do this here in Scotland or whether we go to Nairobi and helping a new continent form similar interconnection markets, that's really a fantastic opportunity for us. If you look at how we start in the UK, building out from London to the regional places like Scotland and Manchester, it's very much the same. London traditionally was one of the large interconnection hubs in the world because all African traffic was exchanged in London. And as the market matures in Africa, we're really excited to be part of that expansion in Africa and helping them see the same value.
Excellent. Simon, it's been a busy year too at Pulsant, hasn't it? Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to this year.
Not just this year. I'm going to say for the last 3 years, I've been really proud to lead the team, which has across the business created Pulsant as the UK Edge platform for the UK. So the vision really here has been to be able to support not only today's workloads, but also get fit for tomorrow's workloads, which we believe will be more regionalised. There'll be more and more data processed, consumed at the edge. The nature of the workload will change, and I guess the way I'd sum it up is the centre of gravity for data and digital is definitely on the move away from the centre and into the regions at the moment, driven by all sorts of macroeconomic things, which I'll get onto later, probably. So we've been very busy doing the engineering work, bringing it to market and getting ready.
Thanks, Simon. So we'll start with a few questions. And the first question really is at the heart of both of those two things you just talked about, and that's about collaboration. So collaboration is at the heart of an internet exchange. What challenges and opportunities do you see ahead for partnerships in networking in the era of AI and edge?
I think, first of all, I mean, a little bit broader picture is that, so I've been in this industry for 30 years, and for well, more than 30 years actually. And in those 30 years, tomorrow has kind of looked like today, just a little bit faster, right? And for the first time in 30 years, I don't think tomorrow will look like today. I think it's going to be very different. I think it will still be faster, by the way, but it's going to be a very different type of environment. And one of the things, I'm not going to criticize Michael's questions, but we talk about the AI as if we're all going to go into the AI shop and buy our AI and go home with it, right? We're not going to do that. It's going to be part of all our lives. It's going to be part of all our business processes. All business models will somehow involve AI and evolve with it. When IT was introduced, if we go back to the 60s and 70s, no productivity increases came from just the launch of IT, right? We saw business transformations, we saw business model evolve, and I think that's what we're seeing happening, and that's what I mean that tomorrow won't look like today. I think one of the things that's very exciting from the partnership part, and what I think probably going to come into the compute loads, is that historically up until now, a large part of what we have done and processed has been done on our devices. It's been on our phones or our laptops. That's not going to be the case in the future, not necessarily. A lot of this compute will actually be offloaded away from us and done by the network, and we'll consume the outcome of that. And that had quite a profound impact on the cooperation and how we deliver this. First is that means that the exchange of traffic, the exchange of data, the delivery of our application, I don't necessarily mean application as a software, but the outcome that we're looking for is going to have to be much more distributed than today. And that's part of the reason we said edge. I also don't think that the future will be this monolithic network stack that we have today, right? It's going to be an application, the outcome will consist of many different components that are results of the cooperation, be it by the data centers, be it by us as the interconnection part, the delivery. It's all going to be also done by different parts. Not everyone will have all AI models about everything, right? So you're going to have to push together different components and building blocks to build whatever outcome you want. To some extent, we already see this with software as a service applications, right? You know, we combine all of these applications to deliver the business outcomes we want. And I think that's really what we're going to see in the future. It's going to be a lot more cooperation in that space and a lot more, I hate the word complexity, I don't think it's necessarily going to be that complex, but it's going to be different considerations and different business models than we're used to today. And I'll stop there and probably come back to that.
So in that sense, distribution happens, or there's going to be greater distribution of both the networking components, the network itself, but also the applications and workloads and the partners and the people involved in that process. Is that right?
Absolutely, and that's what we see that, you know, we already have exchanges in exchange of traffic in Manchester, Scotland, Wales, Isle of Man. We're going to see that go much further out in the edge. And again, I think also when we talk about compute, it won't be a compute or a handover. This is going to be done in different levels, right? So the large-scale machine learning will be done in the hyperscalers, very large data centers, while smaller-scale delivery or compute of the outcomes of that will be done in edge data centers or in much more closer to exchange towards the user, and maybe some compute will also be done in your automatic car or whatever. But on the grand scale of things, I think that's going to be a lot less done than compared to what we do. I'd like to see this as a chain of events that creates the outcome, right? And there's going to be this hierarchy of delivery, depending on what you try to do.
Thank you. Simon, how do you see that process of distribution and collaboration evolving?
I actually agree with a lot of what Kurtis just said there, and we see it happening. The applications are becoming more distributed, but I think more than that, there's changes in supply chain globally at the moment. And if you just think about the physical supply chain, which is moving goods from place to place where they're manufactured to where they're consumed, the world is, you know, supply chains are getting shorter because of the politics going on in the world at the moment. Similarly, digital supply chains are also changing, I think, you know, quite dramatically, and the outcome of that will be portions of applications which will run, you know, some of it on your phone, some of it in a regional edge data center, some of it, you know, back in the cloud. We think AI will be the learning and training in the main will happen in very large central DCs as it does today. We think that the regional edge DC space where Pulsant sit will actually is where the models will execute and where end devices will end up essentially, you know, calling for help for things that for input and feedback into the learning models. The other thing I see happening is, just a general comment really, I think organisations want to scale, and in doing so, but they also want to be specialists. So I see a value chain around digital value, which is comprised of many application components, often produced by many different software developers. And that spread also means that all these bits need to talk to each other. So they need to share data. They're going to have, they have APIs, they have message buses, all those architectural things, which mean that the application itself will be more distributed in its own right. So kind of back to the partnerships part of the question then, which is, if you think about that in the context of you've got your bits of code running in a data center in Newcastle, it is not economic actually for every carrier to go and dig into that data center, for all those application providers to talk to each other in the right way and drive the really great response times that are going to be needed. So partnerships are going to be absolutely vital in terms of digital infrastructure in delivering that.
I think someone said something that this is one of my little things to comment. You used the word value chain. And value chain is true. I think there's a value chain, as I described, the chain of events. By coming back to the partnership, I think in the future we'll see a lot more value constellations where the sum of the parts is actually going to be the delivery of the value, right? And I think this is going to be the hardest part for people to get their head around and to deliver this, is that it's no longer going to be a single monolithic chain that delivers the value. It's going to be this constellation of different suppliers, different data sets. Because one thing we haven't talked about, we mentioned AI and 5G, but what we rarely talk about is that underpinning all this is going to be the access to the data, right? Exactly. And that's a completely different set of concerns, by the way, as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think within that discussion around distribution and around different constellations of value and so on, do you feel that that now really is the time where the network operations team starts to get some recognition for the essential work they do, as opposed to the applications guys and the cloud developers and so on? Is now the time for connectivity? Is it really going to be driving a much greater focus on the value of connectivity in businesses, do you think?
I think the network team should always get recognition, by the way. I think, sadly, I actually think we're actually about to abstract away the network, right? And that doesn't mean that, I don't mean that quite literally, right? But I think that I think there's two things happening. One is that in the enterprise segments, I think there was in the past a desire to see this as a black box that we didn't have to worry about. We paid provider X and everything just worked. We got voice, data, every fax, whatever we got over it, and it all worked. Already with the emergence of cloud and software as a service, the CIOs had to insource the knowledge of how this was delivered, right? That became a lot more on their agenda, because they had to understand how they reach these applications. And I think, funny enough, COVID did more for understanding the network team than any engineer ever did, right? Because all of a sudden, not only did the CIOs have to understand that the office had connectivity, the people at home needed the connectivity both to the software and to the office, and all of a sudden it became an incomplete problem, right? So I think that is actually happening. So on that level, I think it becomes much more interesting and much more important. I mentioned data. I think one of the things that is going to drive the thank you notes for the networking team is, how do we deliver this data? And actually, I think part of me thinks that we're not going to be delivering the data. The data is going to become so large, it's going to be stuck where it is. And one of the things I think we need to figure out is, how do we actually move the compute to the data and the results from there? And that's something we haven't done before. And that's a very, very, well, it's a different panel probably, but there's a change in paradigm for how we build networks as well.
Do we care about networks? Absolutely, right? It's the underpinning of the business for probably most of us in the room, and we have always cared about them. I think, but I think the demand on the network is changing quite a lot at the moment. They're moving from really quite monolithic, perhaps inflexible, through to a real need to be able to react almost in real time to what's happening in the business. That's where this goes, and in order to achieve that, our network will have learned how to write software, deploy software, run infrastructure as code, and that is actually where a lot of the value happens right now for us.
If I may, I'll just turn to a slightly connected but different, see what I did there, connected but different subject. Very often it seemed to be the case sometimes that innovation and security kind of run in slightly different directions. In an era of rapid technological change, how can a business effectively balance the need for innovation with the importance of maintaining a secure, reliable network infrastructure? Simon.
I think it's foundational, actually. I think you have to have the reliable, secure infrastructure in order to be able to innovate. So you think of it as a pyramid. The foundations on the pyramid need to be good, solid digital infrastructure, whether it is network or compute or whatever else you're using. And with the abstraction of capability into software, into infrastructure as code, you also then get the ability to drive some innovation on the back of it. So I don't think it's innovation or operations. I think there is a natural tension between the two things. The governance framework might well be different, right? So running traditional change control processes in a world where you want to change your network 2, 5, 10 times a day means you've kind of got to start trusting the software that you've written and think about it a little bit differently. Similarly, agile development is not the same as waterfall-based projects, so important to establish those principles there in terms of governance. But I don't see it as either or. I think investing in the right place gives you the ability to innovate.
Kurtis, do you see a natural tension between innovation and network and security on a network infrastructure level?
No, I actually agree with Simon. I think that I think we also got in a bit of an industry maturity, for lack of a better word, where we no longer have that. I think security model, security processes are becoming ingrained in everything we do, right, to a level that we have reached a maturity where they not necessarily are conflicting anymore either, right? I think we probably used to be there, but I think as we get more mature and we understand this generally throughout all industries, I think that's becoming less so. I do think where there might be an issue in the future, simply because it's the unknown, is this thing about data and how we deal with data and data legislation, protection and AI learnings around data. And I think we see this, the companies are struggling with, are employees allowed to use ChatGPT? Are you allowed to upload your business plans to, a friend of mine has you can try this at home, a friend of mine has a hobby. He tends to take let's say the FTSE 100 list, and for every single company he goes and Google the name plus business plan with PPTX only results. It's a brilliant exercise, go do it, you'll find so much information. You don't need to write your own business plan next time, just take what they wrote.
I think that's an interesting subject, isn't it? But a good thing to do at home. But also, I think it raises a much deeper point, which is we've heard today here and in other places around the development, the way in which AI is being treated both as an opportunity and a risk, I think, by some businesses. Do you feel that there's likely to be more risk and more opportunity going forward with AI influencing not just what data we have, but how we use that data? Simon?
Great question. Let me bring it back to the network first of all, I think, just to try and contain that conversation a little bit. So think about what I said earlier about having a fully automated network, infrastructure as code. What you end up with is a digital twin of your network, fundamentally. That's the metadata that describes your network. You also got a lot of information about how the network is actually running, its performance, its usage, what traffic's going over that, which you can collect. Where that leads for me is that to a future where we could potentially have feed that into learning algorithms to be able to adapt the network on the fly to the usage that's being demanded of it. So taking away some of the human decisions that happen today. Do I like that idea? No, I feel like that's kind of risky, right? But that's a logical progression of how AI, I think, will influence, network as a service, if you like, and how that's all kind of put together. How will AI drive network, architectures and designs? I think it's back to the distributed model that it's very likely to be to be deployed. And I think to Kurtis's point earlier, there's going to be lots and lots of different ways of doing this. It's going to land in all sorts of different ways. And being perhaps a bit trite, the purpose of infra for me is to actually cope with those changes in workload and do so in a very responsive and clean way. Having said that, centre of gravity is moving to the edge. So that for me is where the investment really needs to go.
I think we're going to see, your question I think used the word resistance. I think any change will have some level of resistance and concerns, right, because it's change. And not all companies will adapt to a future where that is a requirement, right? I mean, we've seen this with any single transition in business model, right? And I think that's going to happen here as well. So yes, there will be resistance, risk, death, whatever, as in death in companies, not death in...
Possibly.
Very clever, good point. Be careful you say. So yeah, I think that will absolutely happen, right? But it will also create opportunities. There's going to be new things coming out of this, and new business models, new business ideas, and new businesses that will thrive in this.
Thank you. So we know that within the network world there is increasing levels of automation within the network. We know there's likely to be increasing levels of autonomy within components of the network as well. What role do you believe the regulatory frameworks will play to shape the direction of network evolution going forward, and particularly when faced with things like AI and the expansion of 5G, well, that's probably less controversial, and other edge technologies? Simon?
Good question. I kind of think about it in two halves, actually. There's the regulatory bit, which is all about the rules within which we need to run our businesses, our networks, and that's just the goldfish bowl that we all have to operate in within that legal jurisdiction. There is a fair bit of regulation already. There's Telecoms Act, there's the Online Safety Bill that came out in the summer, and there's also regulation being developed, I think, around some of the use cases for AI over in the EU at the moment, which are going to get quite interesting. Probably more on that in a minute. So as providers, we just need to be in that goldfish bowl and obey the rules. The flip side of it, which I find quite interesting, is really about government policy and how they go about influencing an open market. So we live in a part of the world that has got a relatively open market, I think, and that which is normally great. And in a capitalist system, money follows the opportunity, and at the pace it wants to, right? But what government does do and can do is to influence that through various initiatives. And I don't know how many of you saw the autumn statement yesterday that £500 million being deployed to support AI innovation hubs around the UK. We've got existing 5G innovation hubs that we're currently working with one of those. There was quite a lot of funding for rural broadband and fibre to the premise when the realisation came really that it just had to be done in order to compete internationally. So I think there's actually quite a lot going on in that world that drives opportunity for businesses and potentially the ability to attract funding, but also work with academia in some of those innovation hubs in order to drive growth for themselves and for the economy.
Thank you. Kurtis?
No, I think I agree with Simon. We operate inside a framework. I often get asked, why is Europe, so let's curve out a bit. Europe is today the most interconnected region in the world, right? We have 136 exchanges across all the European countries, which is more than any other region in the world. We also probably had the most number of telcos, the most fiber to the home, etc. All this, if you ask me, comes back to 1990 when all of Europe deregulated the telecom markets and we allowed this to freely flow and innovate, right? The flip side, you could say, is, as Simon just described, there's increasing regulation coming in place. Is that going to rein in this free innovation? Well, maybe. I think that's a bit more complicated than that necessarily. I'm not necessarily saying that we should have a completely unregulated market either, by the way, because that's not necessarily good for any of us either. I think what we're seeing is that things like the Telecom Security Act and other things are coming in that are really, I think people have underestimated the real impact of the Telecom Security Act, mostly because we haven't actually had to do it yet. I think when that happens, it's going to be a massive thing that our entire industry will be affected by. Now, that's an infrastructure component that affects us as the infrastructure providers. It doesn't really affect the rest of the world, or the providers, or the applications, but we have to take this into account, and it's going to drive our cost up and our complexity. Maybe for a higher good, I'm not going to dispute that, it could be, at least that's the government's claim. On the other side of that is that we have this unknown. I think actually the unknown is worse, because I mentioned it before, when we talk about access to data, sharing of data, and Simon said there's all kind of regulation being devolved around both data, NIS directive being rewritten and all this. And this uncertainty is actually worse. And if you look at the Telecom Security Act, although it's technically an act already, no one can tell you how it's going to be implemented, not even the people supposed to oversee it, right? And I think this uncertainty is probably driving more risk and cost than a lot of other things are. And I think that, if anything, is hampering the willingness to invest, right? That's my view. I think having clarity is always better than forcing people to guess, right?
Thank you. Yes, I think that's a very interesting point. Getting regulations' role in relation to both government investment, but also again clarity about how to provide an operating environment is something that probably all businesses are going to want to see going forward. But looking forward, it's been 10 years for Linx in Scotland. Congratulations, it's good. What are the key changes you can see coming forward in the next 10 years? Kurtis.
In Scotland? Or in, look, we started in Edinburgh. We now cover Glasgow, Edinburgh, so through Scottish interconnection. I think we have seen a lot of interest in just the last year. There's been a real growing interest for all the regional exchanges, but particularly Scotland, which is great to see. And I think we're going to see more and more of this, as we talked about before, as the compute offload, as Simon gave examples of, is going to be more regionalized. There's going to be more drive and more regionalization of traffic. I think we haven't talked about 5G. One of the things that, I think there's two things. First of all, we should all keep in mind is that the 5G network that everybody describes as this utopia, no one's ever built so far, but they might get around to it eventually. That's the first thing. If they do build it, and I think they will, it's going to be driven by the fact that most telco carriers need to collapse their networks into one single monolithic network, and they can only do that with 5G, right, on the mobile side. And I think that will drive some very exciting developments, because that will open up. I mean, I have this a friend, one of our members in Linx is one of the very big hyperscalers, and he says that if you ever go see a diagram of a 5G network, you'll see all this complex radio, how a 5G network is built, and there will be a little cloud down in the corner that says content or the internet. And he said, well, imagine if you are that little cloud down in the corner, and I have one of those diagrams for every single mobile operator in Europe. He said, there's an awful lot of things. I'm only one cloud, though. And we can't forget about this, is that we have abstracted away the rest of the internet, right? And people get so excited about this radio part. And that will drive a lot of need for local interconnection, local handover, because you can't just backhaul this across the entire country, even though latest in the UK is not perhaps massive as some other countries, but it's still big enough that it will be an issue.
That's a little bit like the argument around autonomous vehicles, isn't it? Because we're going to have autonomous vehicles tomorrow, but nobody's actually yet figured out how they're going to connect any of those autonomous vehicles to anything. It's going to be an interesting challenge. Other things will probably emerge probably before that. Simon, how do you see the next 10 years looking?
Probably answer in a slightly different way, right? A very different way. I grew up reading science fiction, and over my lifetime, quite a lot of it has become real, actually, in some way or another. I guess that's the first observation. The second is that if the timeline is 10 years hence, most of what's going to be there in 10 years is already in a lab somewhere. It's on a bench, right? So you could probably go find it if you look. We've got to go and work out which ones are really going to be transformational. I do think we're at a time where, and it's the intersection of technology and people. It's a very human conversation coming up around the use of AI and so on and so forth. Right now, you think about how AI is kind of branded to work. It's a helper. Well, at some point, it's going to be a decision maker, and we're going to have to let it make decisions and abide by those decisions and maybe hold it legally accountable. I don't know how that's going to work, right? There's all that kind of stuff to get through. But it really is a truly transformational time. If I had to pick things, I'd say, obviously AI is the big one, which is landing now. I think there's a tipping point right now on clean tech, actually. I think this is a scale-up point. And I think the world in 10 years' time will be quite different from, it has to be, actually, otherwise horrible things will happen. But really, if you just look at some simple facts like the rate the national grid is decarbonising over the last 10 years, and just carry on that progression, that I believe that will drive a lot. And then I think the other really interesting one is quantum computing and where that lands. It feels like it's a bit like nuclear fusion. It's really slow progress, but at some point it'll land, and it will be scalable. And when technology scales up, it really starts to become transformational, and that really will be transformational for certain workloads. So maybe kind of headline stuff rather than local stuff, but that's how I think about it. But I think if you look at some of the sessions in this, in this conference today, and look at some of the vendors in the room, you'll probably see some of what's going to be there in 10 years' time.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much for those thoughts and that contribution across those questions. I think we have a couple of minutes, so I'm just wondering, is there anybody in the audience who has a question they'd like to raise on this particular subject? Anybody like to raise a question? Okay. That's a no. So in that case, what we'll do is move on to the final question, which is a bonus question for everybody, and it's this. So if AI and Edge were characters in a movie, what kind of movie would it be, Simon?
I think, I mean, here and now, it'd probably be a steampunk genre or something like that. But if you go to your 10 years hence view, I think a historical romance.
Interesting.
I love it.
Yeah, it's very good. I love that. Kurtis.
This is when I wish I read more of your books when you were a kid. I do think it is. I think this is Casablanca. This is Ingrid Bergman and Humphrey Bogart. They meet again after in Casablanca after a long time, where they can't really quite get away from each other. I think that's the picture I see of this in the future.
Sounds like it's the start of a beautiful friendship. Right, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you very much for coming along to this session. And I hope you all have a really good rest of the day and a really good rest of the event here at Digit. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.